Intersection Magazine Podcast.
All right, welcome to Intersection Magazine Podcast. This is 2024, as far as we can tell. And I wanted to do an episode about my journey as a podcaster, as well as my work in Intersection Magazine, so as a publisher. And I'm not leaning too heavily on reach because I don't have the exact numbers, but in my view, I have a few things I think you can learn or you might be able to use in the future if you decide to take this direction. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and thank you for subscribing. Now, Intersection Magazine goes back about maybe 6-7 years. But my first issue, I guess, was released or created, I believe, in 2011. Now, if you look into the history of my work, you'll find, though, that I'm possibly, I guess, obsessed with the concept of intersections and intersecting streets, ideas about change, ideas about transition, ideas about moving on and learning and using the environments in which you're in to get tips and cues about what you're supposed to do next. So, after some experiences in the US around the year 2000, maybe 1999, I came up with some concepts which I only developed on returning to, or not returning, I suppose, on visiting or coming to Uganda. Now, the magazine was created after some thought, and it would be interesting if you came across the little piece of paper on which I created my first issue or came across the ideas. It's a little bit like they talk about the napkin, where people come up with ideas for startups on napkins. I had this small piece of paper that I had cut up into small pieces and stapled together to create a mini magazine. And in the mini magazine, I put together the ideas that I think were going to be part of the structure or scaffolding to be used for the magazine from that day forward. So the first part of the magazine was what I called Under the Scope, and here what I sought to do was to have a section where I dive into one subject, one character, one company, one CEO, whatever it is, just one subject, maybe innovation, maybe cryptocurrency, maybe regulation, just one idea. And the second part was what I call On the Scale, and here I sought to compare two subjects, two ideas, two CEOs, two methods of marketing, comparing two things from, for people to get a perspective how different groups were doing something differently. And then the third part was what I call the search for direction, and I wanted to give very specific steps, action steps to those who are listening or who are following or who are reading. So of course we're talking about a magazine, so those who are reading. And then I had filler sections. I believe I began with a section where I'd talk about the software that I was using. And to be fair, if you go back to maybe 2008, 2009, one of my uncles had given me a copy of Maximum PC, a magazine that's produced in the US, and I really liked what they were doing, so at some point, they are probably responsible for me venturing into the magazine or publishing business. Then, of course, there was some work that we were doing for back in the day in Deja University, a university that's located in Luero, and I was part of the public relations team. I was just pretty much shadowing Mzee, or the old man, and so I used to watch him do supplements for the university, and we also used to put together exhibitions where we talk about the work that the university was doing. So when I got an opportunity to later on think about putting together a magazine and how we would make money from the magazine or how we would monetize the magazine, I thought about supplements as an option of how to monetize. There's actually 3 ways to monetize that I normally use, maybe 4 ways. Advertising, so you split your page up into little bits and you decide how much you're going to cost each of those bits. Then there's a place for supplements where people can have maybe 4 pages devoted to a subject of their choice, or company or an NGO, for a price. And then there's subscription, where people pay you to have copies of your magazine or your delivered to them in either PDF format, or if you have a website, then they can get exclusive access to your magazine. And as you get better at what you do, then you could find means of protecting your content, but at a certain level, you are at the mercy of those who are reading, and if they want to poach your stuff without your permission, that's really a matter of their conscience. But I'm trying to get into the place where I make as much of an effort to pay for people's content, because as you've had it said, karma is a serious thing. You make use of other people's stuff without paying for it, and then you expect people to buy your software or to appreciate your product. This is really people's intellectual property. So anyhow, back to the subject matter. So there's a section that I described the 3 sections and added the section about software. Then now there's a section that I call notice board, where it's kind of like an advertising space for someone or some company that's of note. Then I also have a movie section, or a recommendation movie. And usually what I try to do is have a movie or a film or a series or a documentary that captures the general theme of the magazine that month. I also have a restaurant section, restaurant watch. I also have a book recommendation, where hopefully the book covers one subject or an idea, or just like we were talking about before, a theme that's relevant for that particular month. So you'll find a book review, maybe a page worth of a book review in the magazine. Now, what I normally do, what I used to do before the subscription option came into the picture, was we would release the magazine on LinkedIn in full. But now what I normally do is I just give you the front page of the magazine, and then describe what we're going to talk about in the magazine, with the hope of attracting audiences that will subscribe for the content or to the content. Now, what some people do for podcasts, for example, is they will have, at least the people that I've watched, for example, Acquired with Ben and David. These guys, I suppose, are based out of either Seattle or California, I'm not sure which. But what they normally do is, when you create a subscription model, either for your audio content or for your written content, what people normally do is then you create a community around which you have some extra rewards, or you can create some kind of paywall and provide exclusive content to those who are part of your subscription. So that is probably something that's in the works, or that we will create in the future, hopefully when I am or we are able to get enough subscribers or generate enough revenue. Now, one of the criticisms that I've faced in the magazine is someone once said that they can get the content anywhere, it's free online, but the difference is we're a little bit like exhibitions, or the word people normally use is curation. Is what people do is information is available, but not everybody has access to the information they need at that particular point in time. Libraries are open, but you need a librarian to let you know what you need to read at that particular time if you're doing research, if you're going to undertake a project, whatever you're trying to do at that particular time. So what I try to do is create content or source content or written material, either that I've written myself or that I think my readers might find valuable. Now it's up to you to decide if what you're going to do with that information. You can expand on it and research it, but that's really something that nobody else can teach you. You have to develop on your own. Sometimes we interview individuals who've been successful or who are in the open public space doing things that I think are different or maybe in a sense extraordinary. And once again, it's really up to you to use that information and to meet those people and to interview them or to get their contacts and to find out a little bit more. Not everybody that we interview ends up being as honest as we hope that they would be, but that's really not on us, and it ends up catching up with you. I've made mistakes, other people have made mistakes, but usually if you find yourself in the public domain, the pressures that you face are enough to help develop you into someone that can be useful to society. Now, after some success in the magazine, I transitioned into the podcast. So in the next section, we'll talk about that transition into the podcast and some of what I've learned and how I'm using that tool right now. Now, in terms of my podcast work, there are quite a number of podcasts that I've been listening to for a while, but it's difficult to pinpoint the first episode or podcast that I ever listened to. My guess is that after listening to possibly the BBC, someone there mentioned the idea behind podcasts, and then I moved from what I was listening to back then into podcasting. So for a start, I was really interested in the work of some of the BBC correspondents that were directing or that were leading specific sections of their news work. For example, Lucy Kellaway was one of my favorites. Very humorous, but also very insightful in her takes on the financial world. You really have to be on top of your game if you're listening to her, because she's so knowledgeable in what she does. And it's so easy to get lost in what she's talking about and the humor. But she's been in the game for quite a long time. Then there was also our guest, I believe he was called Peter Davis, I think, who used to talk about management, referencing people like Drucker, for those who've been into leadership and management for a long time. Then I got into, there's a particular Nigerian podcast I really enjoyed at the start, which was really having conversations with people that were in the space in Nigeria and either leadership or technology or business. And what he would do is he would host these individuals and then invite them to recommend the next person that they think should be hosted. After that particular podcast, I believe his name was Blaze, Andre Blaze Henshaw. And at the time I was thinking about maybe setting something up for the Ugandan context, but I didn't have enough contacts to put together something of that nature. Nigeria is a big country, so I suppose the dynamics are quite different. If you look at the podcast scene in Kampala now or Uganda now, there are a lot more players, people that are into entertainment, people that are probably out of the country that are interviewing Ugandans that are doing amazing things abroad. Now the space is quite vibrant. Then I moved on to Africa Tech Roundup with Andile Masuhu, and after some interaction with Andile on online and through his email or the page email, I got to feature in one of the episodes where we were talking about technology bubbles and a few other things, a few other subjects. So that was actually my first appearance on a podcast. That was, I believe, in 2015, maybe. Then after some interactions with him and some research on the internet, I decided to set something up of my own. But that came much later, in 2023. So it took quite a while. But I believe I was probably a step ahead because I already had the magazine as a base, because you need information to talk about depending on the type of podcast that you're going to be doing. And there are quite a number of ways that you can do this. You can have a one-person podcast, or you can have an interview with someone, or you can have yourself with a group of individuals that you speak to, that you talk to. You can be exclusively audio, or you can be video, where you actually have your people see you as you talk. If you're an individual, you can talk about a specific subject, or you can talk about books, review books. There's quite a prominent guy on individual online that does, on the podcast world, that does deep dives into books. And Acquired is a bit similar, except that you have two individuals talking about maybe books, or sometimes interviewing people in the startup innovation space. And the choice you make really depends on the audience that you are trying to reach out to. My suggestion for those who are reaching out to countries that have not necessarily made too many advancements in terms of their data and internet capacity is you should focus on audio content as opposed to video content. If you choose to do video content, you have to make sure that you're in a place where your audience will be able to make full use of the experience. Plus, if you do video content, then you have to make sure that you've invested in a lot more equipment to make it a useful experience. Now, the other thing that you will have to think about if you're doing podcasts is, are you going to be focusing on in-person interviews, or are you going to have sessions where people call in, or you record via the many tools that exist online to make this a pleasurable experience? Now, for my content, I used some of the material from the magazines, although I have not been very strict in observing this rule. But one thing that I think I should also mention is, when I put out content in the magazine, I also use social media to gauge how effective the material that I put out is being used or seen online. I do that through my blogs. I also do that through LinkedIn, and to a small extent through Instagram and Facebook. Now, using the materials or the statistics that are available in each of these platforms allows you to figure out which content you should emphasize or which content you could use from magazine to podcast. So you need to make sure that you watch your stats on your blogs, and you watch your stats in LinkedIn, as well as, of course, your interactions, as well as with Instagram. So the way people normally do this is, you have your content as audio or you have your content as video, and then what you can do with your content is you can break up your content to suit the different social media platforms that exist and the manner in which people consume that content on those social media platforms. For example, if it's content that's consumed in 3-minute bits, then you can chop up your video or your audio into little chunks that people can consume or that are inspirational, that they will appreciate if they're listening on or in platforms that favor short content modes. In our current age, there are artificial intelligence tools that will allow you to turn your text into video clips or inspirational clips that are popular, that in some cases may go viral. And so those artificial intelligence tools are also very useful. Now, in terms of looking for speakers or people that can be a part of your podcasts, I suggest that you try to attend workshops, technology events, science exhibitions, be a part of your local technology hub or space if you have one, and then interact with those who are in charge and those who are participating, as well as, of course, WhatsApp groups or forums. Back in the day, there used to be forums where you can meet people that are active on whose work you can showcase. Now, monetization is probably the final part, or one of the other parts that are useful in this discussion. What you can do for monetization is, for the podcast, is sponsorship, or at least what I've heard people do is sponsorship, maybe advertising, and then, of course, the indirect methods that I've mentioned before, where you take your content to social media and then try and leverage the numbers that emerge out of social media usage, which you can then translate into some kind of revenue. What I have found in terms of data or statistics in terms of reach is it usually helps if you visit particular places when you're going to do those interviews, especially if you favor the in-person system. Although what you can do is, if you're not going to be able to do these in-person interactions, is when you release the episode and you're featuring founders from a particular country, then you can have an advertising or a marketing push where you use people in that particular country to boost your content or to create a buzz around your content so that you can increase the listenership in that particular country. This seems to have worked for Kenya and Tanzania, and of course my Ugandan audience, but also for those that I have tried to interact with in the past who happen to be in the US and who I usually tag or who I mention when I'm talking about some of the projects that I'm involved in. I hope you find this useful. I thought this would be very good to put together, especially because I have had probably about 4 different people ask me about the podcast space and request more information on how they can venture into the podcast space. Now you can also do a bit of research in terms of getting equipment, podcast mics, or if you have a decent phone, you can get an application that helps you get this done. On my part, I had to do a bit of research to find out what particular applications, or either for Android or for iOS, were available, and what the capabilities for each of those tools was. Were they paid for tools? Were they free? As well as, of course, what equipment I needed to get this started. I hope once again you find this useful. Please don't forget to subscribe to our magazine. It only costs you $24 for the year, and also would love to have you read and become part of what we're writing in our blogs. There's a religious blog, there's a blog covering telcos, there's a blog covering the hub space, there's a blog covering developers, there's a blog covering entertainment, movies, if you're a movie buff. So we cover quite a number of subjects. For those who are spiritual, you might enjoy our blog on that subject matter as well. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening.